obviously this is a great night. We have a terrific panel. And, as I'm sure all of you know, we're just, a stone's throw away from the site of the Fillmore East. So I'd like to, bring the panel out, like right now. So we have our members are Elliott Landy, who's a prominent photographer for many years. Joshua White, who is the reason that light show was called.
All right.
We have Jonny Podell, who's a booking agent and manager, and someone who worked very closely with Bill Graham. Amalie Rothschild, who is a photographer who worked with Joshua. So why don't we just start down there with you, Jonny? Just say a few words about the kind of impact that the Fillmore made on you. A word or two about Bill Graham, maybe, and then we'll just go down the line to Amalie.
Okay, well, I was a newbie as an agent. Only other job I had was school teacher the year before out of college, and
Microphone.
Is there, it's behind you. It's not a stand over your head. Is there something?
There you go. Very nice.
hi everybody, my name is Jonny. I'm a drug addict and alcoholic.
Welcome to the book. Hello.
So I was a rookie agent in 1969, and the Fillmore was already up and running, and a really interesting thing happened. As an agent in the business in those days, when we would make a deal with the buyer, because the agent was the seller. There's an agent, there's a seller, a buyer, and a can of peas. In any business, just our can of peas had big egos and a lot of demands. And the industry policy at the time was once you made a deal, let's say it was $100 fee, the buyer, the promoter, Bill Graham, would give you 50% of that in advance upon signing, and then the balance that night. Well, Bill had other ideas. Bill had a no deposit policy. I'm a rookie, and one of our important acts at the time was a blues band called Canned Heat.
Yeah.
I'm sure you got it. Okay. So their manager said to me, okay, we want to play the film, but here's what we want. And Jonny, I'm just telling you, we get a 50% deposit. I'm going like this. He goes, I know what you're thinking. I'm just telling you. I go, So he keeps telling me, and I'm like intimidated and terrified to call Bill Graham. Hi, Bill, I'm Jonny, So what I did is, I remember it was either Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. We were closed. I took the time off, but I had off, and I remember tiptoeing down to the Fillmore East. I swear to you, I had more fear in my heart. And I went to the box office, and it was during the day. It was slow. There was nobody there, but there was a guy, putting things in the tickets, and I said, excuse me, when I get nervous, my voice goes up, I said, excuse me, do you know, is it Bill Graham here? And the guy didn't turn around, he just said, who wants to know? And I said, I'm Jonny Podell. Turns around, he goes, hi, Jonny, I'm Bill. Anyway, that was the beginning, and eventually that day, stammering, stuttering, and peeing in my pants, I did have the nerve to ask for a 50% deposit. And that began the most amazing relationship. Business, because I represented the Allman Brothers, and that was really the favorite. And Bill became an important person in my life, professionally, personally, friend, mentor, and it was my band that they chose to close the Fillmore. So I go way back with the Fillmore. I love the Fillmore. I love Bill, and so that's my story right now.
Very nice.
Say a few words about the Fillmore East, or Bill, or shooting there, or
I came to the Fillmore East by chance, actually. I was working with underground newspapers, taking pictures of anti-war demonstrations, and abortion rights movement and stuff, and my goal was to try and change the world by showing what was right or wrong with my photography. And one evening, I was working with an underground newspaper called The Rat. Right? The Rat Subterranean News, which I became the photo editor. And one evening after we put the paper to bed, we're walking along 2nd Avenue with a couple of people from the paper, and we see a sign on a marquee saying Country Joe and the Fish Light Show. And that was the Anderson Theater, not the Fillmore. And we said, what is this? I had no idea what it was, but we walked over, we got inside because we had press passes, and I saw this incredible light screen and music and everything, really a knockout mind-bending experience. So I took out my cameras and went down front and started to take pictures. The next week I went back, it was Janis Joplin, Big Brother and the Holding Company, and then the Fillmore opened after that. And Janis Joplin and Tim Buckley opened Fillmore East also, I think Albert King.
50 years ago today.
Oh, so I went in there and I went back for a number of months, I guess, every so often. I didn't make a career out of doing it, but I was, of course, totally in love with the music. But for me, when I was photographing the music and publishing the pictures in the Rat, I felt like we were proselytizing for a new way of living, a new way of being. People, when they came to a concert, they were sharing with each other. Everybody was smoking grass, not everybody, probably everybody, and sharing joints with each other, and you were immediately connected to the person next to you. And for me, it was like saying to people, look, this is the way you can be. You don't need to be the way that you are now, the way society is, the way corporations are. And the musicians in those years were all against the war. They were, when they played, they often spoke against the war as well, and so on. So for me, it was really a political statement, even though I wasn't really into politics per se, to do it. But it was the communality and the brotherhood and the oneness of it all that inspired me to take all the pictures that I did.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Elliott. I mean, I can't think of anyone who probably had more of an impact on, you know, the kind of physical environment of what it was like to be at the Fillmore than you did. I wonder, you know, we'll hear plenty from you in the course of the evening, but, you know, I wonder if you could just, just tell us a little bit about the conceptualization of the light show, you know, this idea that this was going to be part of, you know, what was going on. I mean, the ideas of happenings and things like that were in the air, but, you know, the Fillmore seemed to take it to another level.
Well, I was in the disco lighting business in the earlier 60s, and there was a whole bunch of us, and we'd all gone to Carnegie Tech together, now Carnegie Mellon University. We all had theater experience, and we just wanted to do things that were interesting. And just by sheer good luck, my company was hired in the summer, in August of 1967, to give support to a promoter from San Francisco who was doing a series of shows, a week in fact, in a theater in Toronto. And we went up and we provided support and just got along great with the promoter, who was Bill Graham. He brought with him the Jefferson Airplane and the Grateful Dead. And we gave him support. We just gave him a kind of support that he was not used to. And a rapport developed. And I had to light the show as well, which was not terribly complicated because in those days it was just a wash. It was a red wash or a yellow wash, an orange wash, and back to red again. It wasn't complicated. Tell the follow spots what to do, and I sat in the back of the house. And by the end of the week, I was just fascinated with the music was in me, but more important is the San Francisco light show was in me. They were doing their light show for the first time, not from a balcony, but from behind a very large screen. And when I saw this deconstructed on the screen, I thought, this is what I want to do. And as soon as we got back to New York, we started doing light shows and working on it, the people I worked with and me. And by the end of the year, this was a couple of months later, we did our first big successful light show in Long Island. Then I wanted to keep working, and I heard about the Anderson Theater, which was a dump. I mean, it was a great old theater, but it was a dump. And
I
I
can
brought
attest
with
to
me
that.
all the people I worked with, and I brought all the Carnegie Tech people in, and we all just started working on it, and the man who ran the place was just a gangster. And he didn't appreciate us, he just sat there and collected everything in cash. His goal was to cheat Jonny Podell out of the 50%. And Bill was hesitant to come to New York because he was a failed actor in New York and a big success in San Francisco. In New York, it was ballrooms. He could charge people to go in, to go out, whatever. He made a lot of money. New York was very difficult for him, but he came and he saw one of our shows, the Janis Joplin show, at the Anderson Theater, and we raised the screen during the scene change, and he saw how the full house. And 3 weeks later, we opened at the Fillmore in March 8th. And the reason that the Joshua Light Show was so prominent, as opposed to the West Coast Light shows, was simply because we were fully formed. Bill never had to worry about us. We agreed on the price right away. And the first note of music, the first thing that happened, Albert King comes out on stage and there's a full light show. And it was one of the best 2 years of my life. I just loved it.
Fantastic. Well, Amalie, if I'm correct, you started out working with Joshua. Is that true?
Yeah.
And you obviously have gone on to, among other things, amass an incredible collection of Fillmore stuff that you've shot. And tell us about some of your initial experiences there, and then I think you have a surprise to show us.
Yeah. I was a student at NYU, which was in the building next door, and the Graduate Institute of Film and TV. And the sound technician was one of the first sound people at Fillmore East. And I was the techie girl in the class. There were six of us out of 34. And shortly after it opened, I missed the first show. The first 2 weeks I missed, actually. He gave me a pass, said, you gotta come over and see what we're doing here. And when I went to the theater, I saw a poster I designed for one of our film productions up in the sound booth, and I felt like I belonged here somehow. And I didn't know the music, it was all new, and I got completely taken away, and I had a pass, and I would show up on Friday afternoons, and it was amazing. And one weekend, I actually made the mistake of allowing a classmate to convince me to sneak her in. And Jerry Pompili, the security guy, caught us at it, called me, and said, you'll never darken our doors again. And I said, that's not true. I didn't say anything. I was cowed, and I left, and I started immediately thinking, he can't do this to me. And I had been a complete fan, mesmerized by the light show, and I figured, well, the only way I can get back in here on staff legitimately is what I have to contribute as a filmmaker and a graphic artist and a photographer is to work with the light show. So I called Josh up, and the following Tuesday, he had me come by in the afternoon, and I had already put together a little portfolio and my materials, and I sat down in the light show room backstage, and we talked, and he said, fine, you can work with us, you're hired, and it was $50 a week. That was a lot of money back then. And he, 40. Was only 4? I remember 50.
We'll sort this out later.
So he took me around to Kip Cohen, who was the manager, and I got my staff pass. And the following Friday, I showed up and showed Jerry, see, I'm on staff now. You can't keep me out of here. And I was like the fly on the wall taking photographs of life. Somehow, I don't know why, but I realized something incredible was going on there. I had no ulterior motives or any ideas about it, but I was a photographer, a documentary person, and I started taking pictures. I bulk rolled my own film and processed myself. Bill didn't, nobody paid me for that, and so I owned all the work, and I have about a 20,000 picture archive. Now, although as the work developed, Bill's liked my pictures, and so a lot of them were used in the weekly program, and some of them were up on the wall in the office, and I became kind of like the candid camera of the Fillmore. And so I have a little slideshow here. This is, for those of you that remember, this was actually the marquee, the very last set of concerts at the end of the line. But which one of these goes forward and back?
The right.
Okay, so I have two very quick pictures. That was me back then in the light show room backstage with some of the film loops and stuff we did. And this is Elliott Landy, who was one of the two official photographers at Woodstock. Everybody should see who he was back then. And this is the light show. That's all of us. That's me over there. There's Josh and Bill. And
Who's on the right?
That's Cecily. Is she here? Did she come in? She's from Long Island. She gave me permission to use this. Well, are you here? No. She still looks this good. I've seen her recently. She's gorgeous. Okay. So I'm going to run through. These are mostly, everyone who was there, but everyone who wasn't. You'll see but look at the combination of the kinds of groups. And one of the really fantastic things about Bill Graham is that he was determined to educate his audience, and he put together really amazing shows with jazz and blues and all kinds of Miles Davis, with Neil Young and Crazy Horse and Steve Miller. I mean, remarkable combinations of music. And in fact, it was part of his job to educate these young, rock and rollers who didn't know much of anything. One weekend, James Cotton was the bottom of the bill with Led Zeppelin. And when James Cotton came on, he got booed. And Bill happened to be in New York at the time, and he was furious. He came out on stage, and he really dressed down the audience. He said, "This is one of the great blues artists, and you have to respect him. Give him a listen. You may be here for the heavy metal, but you need to broaden your taste and listen." And then the group calmed down, and he gave a great set, and everybody called him back for encores and really appreciated it. But Bill had that in him. So R.D. Lang. Does anyone remember who R.D. Lang
Yes,
was?
of course.
Those are the ticket prices. And this was after they were raised. They were originally $3, $4, and $5, and that raised 50 cents. And by the way, the second balcony was $3.50, but that was, in fact, not only were those the first tickets to sell out, it wasn't because it was $3.50. It was because the ushers never went up there, and that's where the smoking gallery was. It's Bill with Jerry Pumfield, who actually started out as the heavy at the Anderson and moved along with the light show and everybody there. This is the Lowe's Commodore, and the Yiddish Theater was what became the Fillmore East. It was known as the Village Theater. It was this very ornate, beautiful old theater, movie palace. And what was special about it for Bill at the time was that it was different from San Francisco, was the ballrooms, was that it was a theater with a proscenium arch and a stage and numbered seats. And that was what actually gave the opportunity for rock and roll to transform from just hippy-dippy concerts to real rock music theater, and for the light show to have a place to work behind the stage and a permanent exhibition. So this was during the NET taping, which was the first national television broadcast of rock and roll. And I always wondered who those two older people are there. And I found out later that they're the parents of the lead singer of Sha Na Na. So this is what it looked like, okay? And that's the theater in the back. And there was a fire before. When that fire happened next door, it was during a Who concert, and what happened was pretty famous because the fire department came in and Pete Townsend threw the fire marshal off the stage. Then they quietly got everyone out. The white building next door was the NYU Graduate School of the Arts, which is where the film school was and the theater program. And what you need to know is that except for the Carnegie Mellon group, and that was Josh and the light show people and Kip Cohen, who was the managing director. The rest, all the staff at Fillmore East were NYU students. And their teachers were the head guys. The theater tech program with Chris from Carnegie Tech. Chris Langhart, who was
I wonder if we could move along to the Hendrix stuff, just our time.
So, here we go. See, but look at those combinations of groups way back when. Okay, so this is the Hendrix rehearsals. That's with the Voices of East Harlem that were the head of the bill, and we have a surprise at the end of this with Hendrix. This is from the December 31st, 1969 concert with the Band of Gypsies. So here we are. Welcome to Fillmore East. This is the tambourines that Bill had put on every seat for the December 31st, 69 New Year's Eve concert for everybody. And Bill gave all kinds of parties backstage. He brought in a separate hot dog stand one time to feed everybody. Here's Bill. We had breakfast at Ratner's at 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning, and the old waiters, see them about, they hated us. But we kept them in business. And the lobby was placed for, you know, hot stuff. Here's the back, this was the backstage door. And for those of you who wondered, yes, there was illegal taping going on. Where are they? They're around. No, the Wolfgang's Ball has a lot of them. So this is Eddie Kramer. This is the new sound. They built their own sound, the new sound system. It was the state-of-the-art sound system for rock and roll at that time. All of this stuff was invented there because prior to this, the microphones were for classical music. See Anthony rushing us because we don't have a whole lot of time, but get into the light show.
Do you have a website?
Yeah, but none of this is on there because everything gets ripped off. That's Bill hiding in the shadows. Bill was on stage a lot, hiding and listening. But I'm at the Morrison Hotel Gallery, and the NET taping was, you can see the equipment.
Don't feel you have to rush on the theater's behalf. If you go over, it's fine with us.
This is backstage. That's Eddie Kramer, sound engineer. He built Electric Lady Studio, and it was Jimi Hendrix's engineer. That's Frank Zappa in the corner down there. That's Jan Bloom, the photographer, and there's Bill with his best friend Mike Klempfer and the other security guy, Steve Rosenfeld, and Daniel Patashu and Paul Stang. It's a whole group of backstage.
Nice.
And with his son David in the office. With Grace Slick at a party backstage in the office, making punch for everyone. That's Kip Cohen. And then the first time for Grateful Dead tickets, people showed up the night before and camped out. It was interesting. It was worth taking a picture of because it had never happened before. And this was the beginning of the whole Deadhead phenomenon. And then when they're selling for tickets for the Dead Loved Allman concerts, they grew up in the Dead. And these are all people trying to get in to the Dead concert. And this is January 2nd, 1970. It's my favorite picture of the whole time because it's everybody in the Dead. You can see them. They were two house bands, the Dead and the Allman Brothers. You can see the crowd.
Big pen.
This was
Santana.
packed hard.
Santana.
So, yeah, Santana too. Yeah, they didn't play quite as often though. That's Owsley Stanley, the famous Sunshine LSD maker. One concert, they all wore Fillmore East t-shirts. And that's Bill playing the cowbell. And this is when they successfully finally dosed him. Backstage. And I was tentative about what backstage pictures I took because I had to use flash. And people mostly let me, but you can see Pigpen really giving me the stare, and I stopped taking pictures after this time because it was clear that was enough. Now, this is the only picture that exists of the famous jam between the Allman Brothers, the Grateful Dead, and Mick Fleetwood of Fleetwood Mac on February 11th, 1970. That's Greg Allman, was a very young man. Barry with the light show. This is Paul Butterfield with the light show. Albert King with the light show. John Fogerty in a double exposure with the light show. I did a lot of those. And here's Bill at the microphone on the rare time when the screen was lifted and you could see all the light show equipment on their platforms on the suspended on the back wall, which you will see there. There's the Joshua Light Show on their 2 platforms on the back wall. Because it was a rear projection system. And that's Tom Shoesmith, the Lumia guy on the upper platform. That's Cecily, who you saw in the portrait, who was not only on the overhead projectionist, but she created all the colored oils and all the colored oil and alcohol that was used for the psychedelic light show stuff. And slides, this is Josh, so with the, and that's Kenny with the color wheels. And this is the Joshua Light Show's 2nd birthday. There's Josh. Yeah. That's Lynn Cohen, Kip's wife. Everybody always loved that picture. So, and this is it's 43 examples of some of the light show compositions. And the light show screen fell down during a performance at one point, and this is the emergency of everybody pulling it back up and repairing the ropes. And I don't remember. Do you remember what happened?
No, I was after everybody thought it was part of the show.
Yeah. It was pretty scary at the time. That's a triple exposure taken in the camera. It's not Photoshop. Laura Nero was one of my favorites. I always thought she was underappreciated. And Simone. Ray Charles. Davis. Taj Mahal. Oops, and this is welding the screen for Tommy. Bill put up, you know, back in those days, Bill was always reviled as a capitalist pig. There was even graffiti in the bathroom to that effect, but that wasn't the case. He cared about giving the best show possible to everybody, and we convinced him to put up the money for completely sold-out shows for Tommy for a week, to put up money for a special production number. They built a new curved light show screen and improved the sound system, and I got money to do special films for the Acid Queen sequences, and he was not a stingy at all. He really wanted to give the public the best show possible, and he really, really supported his technical staff. It was a wonderful, creative, artistic environment backstage at the theater. More things were created there than you can imagine that are now the standards for the production of rock and roll all over the world. John and Yoko showed up one night with Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. And this is an ushers meeting. And this is more the ushers in the ushers room backstage, counting the ticket stubs, which they had to do twice every night. And you can see all the posters on the wall. That was great. This is the sound booth. And this was one of the many parties that backstage. And this is a picture. I talked to everyone in that picture, and I myself who took it, none of us remember who she was. It's not, I know, nobody knows who she was unless she was there. She looks This is Pink Floyd. Giving me the stare. And this is Mary Lou Capes, who became Bill's, she started as a candy girl and became Bill's private secretary, and this is taking down the names and letting people in for the press conference when Bill announced the closing of the Fillmore in April of 1971. That's the press conference. You can see all the news cameras, that's what they looked like back then. And the last final showcases. Well, so we afternoon of the last concert, which was June 27th, 1971. This is rolling the posters that were given out to everybody on the last concert. And here are the roses on there was a rose on every seat for the last show. And it's the Allman Brothers. This is some backstage stuff with them. This was the sound check. Here's part of the show. And the Beach Boys were on that show too, in their scruffy hippie stage. And there's Bill backstage watching the Beach Boys from behind the speakerphone. And there we go. And this slide was put together and was used at the end of every Grateful Dead concert. But I thought it was a fitting way to close.
Very nice.
I should say, I grew up in the West Village and was, started going to shows before I was a teenager. And one of the things about them is that when I got to the Fillmore East, and I saw that Doors show that was advertised, and I had seen shows at the Anderson Theater, and I'd seen the Rolling Stones at the Academy of Music, and the Dave Clark Five at Carnegie Hall. And there was until the Fillmore East, I never really was at a place, it was the first place I ever went to that seemed designed to present this music, in a smart way. The sound was good. I remember when that fire happened, they rescheduled that Friday night show for a Sunday, and I went there to buy tickets for that Delaney and Bonnie featuring Eric Clapton show, but I loved the Who so much that this show that was rescheduled for the next day, I just thought, all right, I'll buy a ticket for that, for the rescheduled show. And when I got there, this is the kind of thing that would happen all the time in other places. When I got there, I had bought seats right up front in the first balcony in the loge, essentially in the second or third row in the center. And when I went there, it was like somebody sitting in those seats saying, "Oh no, man, because it's like a rescheduled show. It's not like about tickets. We're just here to see, show and everything." And I just thought, wow, this can't be because it was the Fillmore, and Fillmore wasn't like that. And I went and got an usher, and that person got out of that seat. It was, it was about, to me, it was about the music, and about getting to see the show, and not about all this other stuff. And I remember seeing Graham at those shows, and just seeing him, standing around and watching, and enjoying himself, and also just making sure everything was working. And that element of that kind of hands-on quality and that concern for what was actually being put in front of people was something I just never forgot. And I just wanted to open that for discussion with our panelists about that sort of aspect of creating an environment in which both the music and all of the things surrounding the music could get as full and appropriate an expression as it could.
I have the talking stick, so I will start. It fell upon me, the microphone.
I'm sorry?
Never mind, it's okay. The idea was that Bill had tremendous respect for the audience, and because he ended up buying a theater, and it was big theaters, like 2,700 seats. That's a big theater. A big Broadway theater is 1,700 seats. This was a big, big theater. He bought the theater, and then he had theatrical people working for him, either in management or filtering people through NYU. So he was able to get things that he wanted done. So if he had an idea, and he was a very good showman, if he had an entrepreneurial idea or something that he wanted to do, all he had to do was ask. When he booked The Who for a week, which started to sell out even before tickets went on sale, Amalie suggested, let's do something more, and he just went for it. And so we did more, and when the airplane came, we did more. And all these little touches that you see in Amalie's photographs are all about the fact that Bill was a showman, and he really wanted to be an impresario. And he was able to do it at the Fillmore. He respected the audience, He made them respect the music. And a lot of these shows that you see, he knew that a band like Chicago Transit Authority would sell out. He knew that. He wasn't worried. So he could therefore book other people, Mongo Santa Maria, as the opening act, or Buddy Rich and his orchestra. He could do things like that, and the more successful the Fillmore was, the more he did that. And that's really why it was such a great place.
Johnny, from your standpoint, dealing with Bill, what was he like? You know, to negotiate with, and I'll just throw it to you.
I did have a real special relationship, so I never saw.
Use the mic.
I never really saw that other side of Bill that was famous, but I will tell you an interesting story one day. Bill and I together booked the first sold-out stadium tour of Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. And so Bill said, why don't you come out to San Francisco, you know, bring your wife, she can hang out with my wife, and we'll do this together. So, you know, save time instead of calling each other, blah, 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 to get it done. So I remember once I'm in his office, and he has an agent on the phone, an agent that I thought he liked, and he started screaming, abusing. I saw the veins in Bill, like, and you know, it's very embarrassing when somebody's humiliating somebody else and you're there. So I stood up and I said, oh no, he says, no, sit down. I said, no, just sit down. So he creams the guy, he berates the guy, he abuses the guy, he assaults the guy, it's all over, he looks at me and goes, now I can get my day started. That was Bill, always a consummate actor, but yeah, he was tough, like I said, but I did have a special relationship. We rarely argued. Maybe it was a lot because I did represent his favorite band, the Allman Brothers, or maybe it was because of our special relationship. But he was tough. It was only Bill's way. Yeah. It was really good. I will echo one thing that was said before, but you guys said it better than me. I once said to Bill, I don't understand, because I didn't really come from a musical background. I guarantee you everybody in the audience has much more deeply steeped in music than me. I didn't know what hit me, you know? And I said to Bill, I don't get it. Why do you put on Mongo Santa Maria? By the way, don't malign that act, it was mine. Why do you put on Mongo Santa Maria with Led Zeppelin, with Dizzy Gillespie with The Who? And this is a lesson I never forgot. He says, well, you give him the steak, and then you make him eat the vegetables.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Elliott, could you talk a little bit about, you know, your maybe, I don't know, did you have a relationship with Bill, or did you shoot at the Fillmore East? You know, what were your experiences like?
Well, Bill was always very comforting to me. He allowed me to do whatever I wanted to do. I could stand anywhere I wanted in the theater, go up front, walk to the back. And I didn't really have much of a personal relationship. I don't tend to talk too much when I'm photographing. But we always nodded to each other and said hi. He knew who I was and so on. But I really wasn't very close to him in that sense. But it was what everyone's saying here was the environment of let happen what needs to happen to make the evening brilliant, to make what's going on perfect. And the freedom that they gave me, anyone that tries to take pictures of concerts, even a few years after I stopped doing that, became impossible. You had 3 songs, you had to stand in the middle of in the front of the auditorium, and so on. But for me, it was total freedom. If it had been any different, I couldn't have worked there because I don't do well with restrictions. And, I was able to stand where I want, and I figured it out. The lighting was very, very dark there. It was a technical challenge to take pictures. I had to had a special lens from East Germany that I modified to go on my Nikon. So I was using a telephoto lens. It was the only wide aperture lens that existed at that time. So quite technical challenges as well to do this.
Amalie, why don't we start with you? We'll go down the line before we open the floor to questions. Can you talk about like one specific high point? Can you pick one?
Oh my, there's several, it's hard to choose. An extraordinary moment was in particular, at a Dead show, when they did Dark Star. The crew, the stage crew, were completely in communication with each other on headsets, which were invented, designed by the tech staff, the Fillmore East, John Chester, Bob Goddard. Bob C. was the technical director that kind of opened things up, and Chris Langhart, who was the tech genius who kept things going. They're remarkable. So everybody could talk to each other, and they could plan for these kinds of things. And this meant that the follow spot operator up in the old projection booth, 150 feet away, could talk to the lighting designer on his dimmer board on the stage left, and the box across on the left, and to the sound mixer on the right, and everything could be, they could communicate everything. So they dimmed all the lights, the place was pitch black. It was really black, they couldn't see a thing, and the dead are on stage, and they begin that slow riff, Dark Star. And just as they reached the right point, the crescendo, boom, they had lowered a mirror ball. Remember those? The disco?
Yeah.
But this was probably the first really important time the mirror ball was used. They had lowered it in the dark, nobody knew it was there, and then bam, it was hit with all the Super Trooper lighting implements, and it just sent the universe spinning in the theater, and there was literally an audible gasp from the entire audience, everyone, just this marvelous sound, and it's memorable. I can run that movie in my head to this day. It was really, really extraordinary.
Joshua, what about you?
Well, I just want to say that I was fortunate in that the 2 years that I really was working there, I had no problems with Bill Graham. Whatever he grew into or changed, he just treated me beautifully. I have so many great moments, but I'll pick one. The Who were playing for a week, and they were young, and they came out and they performed. There's only 4 of them, of which only really 2 were singing, and they performed the entire Tommy, which was brand new then, from beginning to end, nonstop. And the audience went nuts, and all the shows sold out. They went off stage, and they came back, and for an encore, they sang everything else, all their other hits. my generation. I've never seen such an amazing performance. And for the first and only time, the light show actually ran out of ideas. But we were the Fillmore, and we could do anything. And so one of the head technicians there, Bob C., had an arc welder, an open arc welder. And we were able to set it up behind the screen, put some things in front of it to make shadows. And when they reached a certain crescendo during the encore, we just fired the arc. It was totally dangerous, totally illegal. I would give anything to do it again. That would be a favorite moment.
Well, my favorite moment was when I decided not to photograph the Jimi Hendrix Experience because I was stoned and tired, and I just photographed, I think, 2 other bands before that. And I carried around, as I was saying, cast iron lenses and 2 camera bags, and et cetera, et cetera. So I decided I'll get them another day, and I was just too tired to get them another night, and I was too tired to take pictures, I thought. So I pack up all my gear very carefully in my army. In those days, photographers didn't have photography bags. They were army bags. They were the only things you could carry film and cameras in. So these green bags you carry around. And I pack up and I go to the back of the theater, and I have my hand on the door, on the exit door, and Hendrix starts to play the first note, ding, whatever it was, and it froze me. It was like a sheet of ice can. I couldn't move. And I turned around and I said, I'll go watch for a little bit. And I walked to the back of the auditorium behind all the people, and I just stood there and watched. And of course I was forced to take my camera out. And I shot a few from the back, which you're seeing up there. It's a black and white photograph. And you see the Jimi Hendrix Experience. It's flashed a few times. So, and then I went up front. And it was really good because that was the only time that I ever saw him. He passed away before I could see him again. So that's my story.
Jonny, what about you?
I had three. I'm going to cheat, but I'll get it all in 30 seconds. One was when Bill introduced Elton John to America. I was there. The other was Mad Dogs and Englishmen. I'll never forget, the performers kept on groups of 4 people, 5 people, group, and more people, then singers, then horn players, then there were groupies, then there were dogs, there were limo drivers, there was chaos, all beautifully conducted and led by Leon Russell. It was an amazing night. But the most passionate night for me was, it was a week-long run of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, right after Kent State. And I can tell you what Neil Young was wearing, where he was standing. He was wearing blue jeans with leather patches. And when he went into Fort Dead in Ohio, I mean, I guess it was situational. It was the time. But I mean, I'm feeling it right now as I'm telling you about it.
Oh, it's very timely still.
Can I just give you
Yeah, by all means.
The coda was what made it really special. Well, you have to know, I grew up in the Bronx, lower middle class, raised in Queens, you know, we didn't know about limos, you know, like I hope one day I could take a taxi. So I get out of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young with my wife, and all of a sudden we start to head uptown to our apartment that was, I don't even know if I could fit here. And all of a sudden I saw a limo, and I just said, follow me. And I went over to the driver and said, excuse me, Mr. Crosby said he'd take it, and then come back and get him. And the guy went, get in, and I knew this was the business for me, right?
I'm just going to add one little story.
Go right ahead, please.
That I was there that night that Elton John played also, and Bill invited me into like what seemed like a little broom closet or something, a small office someplace, and introduced me to Elton John. He said, "This is Elton John." And I knew his music already, so I was but it was just like very casual. Oh, there's Elliott, come on over and pull me in the closet, like.
Oh, nice.
I remember that.
I saw one time, you know, in terms of these, you know, opening acts, of which there were many very memorable ones, and I'm so embarrassed because when I was a teenager, I wasn't always alert to how great some of them were. I mean, I realize now you can find, of course, lists of everybody who played every time. I think I saw Fairport Convention open for Traffic. I was there to see Traffic, and you know, Fairport Convention. I wasn't on to, you know, English folk music yet. Now, I mean, I love that band, and I was chagrined that, like, God, you know, these aren't epicene English, you know, musicians, like they're playing these ancient songs, and you know, where's Steve Whitman? But I saw Chuck Berry open for The Who, and he was, you know, Chuck Berry notably kind of on and off, and I've really never seen him be great since then. But this particular night, I think, possibly because he was opening, and possibly because it was The Who, he just burned the place down. And it was like, you know, I got to see one great Chuck Berry show, and you know, usually The Who, when they came out, they would just kind of explode on stage, but this night they just came out, and Ed Townsend apologized. I mean, he just said, look, you know, it's you know, it's just part of the way things work, that we happen to be headlining this show over Chuck Berry, but you all saw what that was. He goes, but he goes, we're The Who, and we're from England, and you know, and they of course did a great show too. But you know, that was you know, to have that chance one time to see Chuck Berry be everything that you know, you knew he could be was astonishing. Well, I know many of you have questions or comments or something. I saw a hand go up. Did someone? Oh, there you are. Okay, sir, in the blue shirt.
Yeah, guys, did you realise at the time when you were in those days, like, this was going to be something that was going to be phenomenal and remembered like it is 50 years later? Did you have any idea that was being created?
I did.
I didn't. I didn't. We were too busy doing it. And the other thing, just that I was looking for a reason to, something at moment to say, is that nothing that we know now existed then. There was no light. There was no seats. There were no ushers. There were no intercom systems, no sound systems. There were union problems. All of these things, nobody did anything like what was done there. It really set the standard. And everything after that, including Elliott's comment about the photographers, everything after that just got more and more complex. And we just, had a moment of innocence combined with not just music, not just great music, but music that really defined our generation, especially in those times. If you were 20, in your 20s, you had this sword hanging over your head called the draft. The country was going to war. The president was Johnson and then Nixon. It was a scary time. And there was this one place where you could actually be with your people, be with your music. It was heaven, but none of us knew what was going to happen next.
New York's Haight-Ashbury a little bit.
And that
Sigmund's
feeling,
place kind of was, yeah.
and that feeling that we're describing up here is what happened at Woodstock. The Woodstock Festival became a free-for-all. It wasn't meant to be that, but it became that. And it was that total feeling of do whatever you want to do. We trust the people are in charge, and they can be trusted to do the right thing. And that's what was going on. I personally had no idea that this was gonna last that long in people's memories, even my own. For me, I was just doing the best that I could. It was almost like you were part of a beam of energy. That's what Josh and that's what Amalie was saying here. That you just were there and you just floated on it. And it was so strong that all you did was respond from the deepest part of you. I'll speak for myself. Respond from the deepest part of myself to make the most beautiful thing I could possibly do, to share it with as many people as I could. Never thought for money, for what it was costing me, for what I was going to do the next day. You were totally in that particular moment, doing everything you could do with everything you had. And that's what it was about.
I'll just say one thing. When the Fillmore opened, I was 25. Do the math.
I was going to say that the first thing is that we were all in our 20s. And the world, we made our own rules as we went along, within limits, and it was a creative laboratory for invention. As I said, the sound system, the microphones were designed for classical music. They had the sound people found ways of putting, Bill Hanley, who had the first sound system in there, putting pads in the mics so that they wouldn't completely distort the loudness of the music that was coming at them. Literally, it was the laboratory for the invention of the technical side of the presentation of rock music in the theater. And then, of course, it expanded phenomenally for the grand outdoor and stadium productions. One of the reasons we were all at Woodstock. Woodstock, at the time, so what, it was a big concert, there were a lot of people there, it rained, it was muddy, it didn't seem like such a big deal to me, and I was shocked at all of the press coverage and what a phenomenon it was, et cetera, afterwards. And it took me 40 years to understand what was special about Woodstock when I was at a reunion at a film festival in Italy with Michael Wadley and all of the people that made the Woodstock movie and it had been restored. And understood actually what was extraordinary about it because it was peaceful. It wasn't Altamont. It was a be-in. It was extraordinary what happened there, and things have deteriorated since then. But what I was going to say is about whether we knew what was going on. We didn't, but I've thought about this a lot, and I knew something was special was going on. I didn't know what it was, and I didn't think about it much, but I knew that I had to take pictures of it, that somehow I had to preserve it in some way. And particularly what interested me was the backstage, was the laboratory, the creative aspect of it. And of course the music was out of sight, and thank God I've got really good pictures of the musicians as well. But just to give an idea, I only photographed the groups whose music I liked. So I don't have any photographs of Led Zeppelin because I didn't like them. And if Elvis had played, I wouldn't have photographed him either. So I have some regrets about how stupid I was, and if I had known, I would have made a very concerted, organized effort to photograph every group from every weekend. And the dumbest thing I've ever done in my whole life was I didn't put the dates on my negative files. I have the names, but I didn't put the dates. It was, you know, this day, the Friday, late show, Saturday, early show, whatever. None of that. And one of the biggest things that's taken up a lot of time was reconstructing all of that when I started to work with my photographs in the 1990s to put together my book, Live at the Fillmore East. And I had a lot of help from the Bill Graham Presents database. So.
One of the first time I ever saw Led Zeppelin was opening for Iron Butterfly at the Fillmore East.
I photographed Iron Butterfly. I liked them.
Well, that's, you know, I ran into, at a bar not far from here, ran into Robert Plant about 3 weeks ago. And we were talking about that night. And because, you know, there was no way, I mean, Iron Butterfly was kind of deflated after Led Zeppelin's opening set. And Plant was listening, and he just said, yeah, you know, it's too bad, because I liked Iron Butterfly. I personally did not like Iron Butterfly, but I was there to see Led Zeppelin. But it was, the thing was, that idea of, like, did you know? I think if you're living actively in history, and certainly if you're young, it seemed to me like the future was something old people thought about. You know, it was, you know, there was this kind of immediacy that was really compelling, and there was also, you know, it's slightly embarrassing. You know, when I talk to my students, I have to, you know, speak for an hour and a half to sort of provide sufficient context for this to make any sense. But there was, you know, that sense that I felt, you know, I mean, I was a teenager back then. I thought everything was going to transform. I didn't think anything was going to be the same. You know, I thought there would be a revolution. There was. It came from the right. But, you know, that wasn't what I anticipated. So the idea of the future was, what would be the point of speculating about that? Because everything is going to transform. Alas. Yes, over here.
I didn't realize that there was such a strong academic connection between NYU and I knew about the Carnegie people. I didn't, and it wasn't until later that I knew that all the house staff was from NYU. I was the only person on the house staff who wasn't from either academic institution. I was there the first.
Get out. High school. You can't be here.
But I was there in my orange jumpsuit because that's what the ushers wore the first night. What nobody has spoken about, I think, and what only a few of us know about, is Bill's sense of family and the sense of togetherness that he fostered for all of us. Amalie talked a few times about the parties backstage. One of the traditions we had was the Thanksgiving dinner on stage for the band who was playing that weekend and for anybody else who didn't go home or didn't have a home to go to. There was a night also where the theater was taken over by a radical underground group.
The up against the wall,
up against the wall people.
The term was liberated. The theater was liberated.
Liberated. So that was then. This is now. And Bill asked us all to stay afterwards and thanked us for doing our best to defend his, you know, and our area. And we had family feeling for 3.5 years. I was only 23, Josh, when I started, and I was, yeah, right, and I was teaching junior high school. Thank you.
Nice.
Yes, in the back. All the way in the back. You with your, Ben, you just turned around.
Okay.
Now you have your hand up in the air.
Thank you. Hey, thank you everybody for sharing great stories, a lot of love in the room. Anthony, you and I think are the similar ages. The only difference is
I'm 66.
I'm 61.
Oh, okay.
So as an 11-year-old, I used to have to take the 86 bus from Englewood, New Jersey to Port Authority. I don't remember how I got from the A train to Fillmore. But it seems like you and I have a fierce love of the Who. They were the best live band ever.
Yeah, well, I certainly did love the Who, for sure.
I see them every time.
Yeah, I saw them at the Village Theater before it was the Fillmore East also.
Wow.
That was when they were still wearing frilly shirts and all that stuff.
Johnny, I saw your clients at the famous live album, weekend. I'm curious, did your careers span over into sort of the punk age or new wave days, or this is to the audience, or to any of you on the stage? Did your careers move over once sort of the Fillmore was over and CBGB started to happen and Mud Club? Did any of you get involved in that?
Yeah, Johnny managed Lou Reed for a little while, right?
Yeah, I managed Lou Reed,
Yeah.
and for a little while,
Yeah.
which seemed like a very long while.
It was a relationship described by Elliott Murphy as a marriage made in the emergency room.
Lou and I would sit there wearing mirrored shades and say, "We'll show everybody. They think we're nuts. We'll show them. We were nuts." And I also, I actually signed Blondie right out of CBGB.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that was my contribution. I wasn't really further steeped in the punk thing. I think at that time I had my own drug issues and I was trying to stay alive. So that, because when I see all these books and people talking, I go, why wasn't I more like involved? But I think I was involved in a life-saving exercise.
Yeah. Interesting.
I stopped my music photography, I don't know, around 1970 or just shortly after this period here. I discovered later in my life that I was more of a person interested in art, although I never call myself an artist, which art means you do something new. And for me, I had explored the genre of taking pictures of musicians and being part of the music business, and I just wasn't interested in doing it anymore, and I didn't understand why, but I just stopped it because I wasn't interested in it. So my career didn't really extend past this pretty short period, actually.
Me? Okay, thank you. My interest in music pretty much stopped when I left the Fillmore. Now, I don't mean music, I just mean I didn't continue with the latest trends of music. I tended to go backwards and become more interested in the big bands and some of the jazz musicians who played the Fillmore. I need to just give a little factoid out here because people have trouble grasping this, but every band that played the Fillmore did 4 shows. 2 shows on Friday, and 2 shows on Saturday. And the top money was like $25,000. And as soon as bands, especially after Woodstock, there was big money in it. A band would much rather do a really bad show in a dreadful place like Madison Square Garden, 1 show, take home $75,000, than have to do 4 shows at the Fillmore. And this made Bill absolutely crazy. I went, after Woodstock, which was almost 2 years, I began to lose interest in the scene. It was changing. When Joshua Light Show went to Woodstock, it was for us a disaster. The screen, which was very big, had no impact on the audience the way it did in the theater. Big surprise, but at the time I was kind of, I felt terrible. It blew down, it rained, it was muddy, and Woodstock was nothing like what the movie shows you because they compressed the time. But I was working with my friend Lee Erdman, there's Lee over there, and he and I both we'd been experimenting using video in the light show. And we have video there, we had 3 cameras, and we were going to put video into the light show, and the screen blew down so we couldn't do it. But Lee and I continued for the next few years doing the next thing, which was big screen video projection. And we went into these big union houses, and Lee could hang a camera and a screen anywhere, and we became the first people to really do big screen television projection. It wasn't very big compared to what you see now, in color, And I was using my credibility as the Joshua Light Show to do Joshua Television. And television as a business was always behind the curve. And they discovered rock and roll in like the 70s, 1973. So Lee and I went to work for ABC, who were producing a big concert series late at night. And I was perfect for them because I could sit at a table with a kind of red-faced, angry, veins popping in his neck Irish engineer who began in radio. And on my right was the Grateful Dead sound man, Owsley. And they're trying to communicate, and I'm in the middle, and I'm being paid. My job is to get them both on the same page. And I just became a television director after that with clearly laryngitis. And my career continued for the next 35 years, and I did sitcoms and soap operas and telethons and the Mickey Mouse Club and Seinfeld. And I retired. Went right back into light shows because, you know, I had a pension and all those things. So, but my interest in new music was much more intermittent. I didn't accept everything that came around.
Yeah, I stopped photographing the musicians when my special access kind of vanished, when the Fillmore East closed. Although I continued to do a few things like the Bob Dylan tour in 1974. And I maintained good relations with the Allman Brothers, so that in the last since 1999, I tried to be in New York during the Beacon run, and I got permission, and I was able to take pictures with them. But what Elliott pointed out earlier, which I wanted to reiterate, that these 3 years and 3 months, there were no rules in there. If you were part of the team and you were part of the family, you could take pictures anywhere at any time, and at that point, the bands were not in control of their images. Nobody thought about that because we were changing the world, and you could do it. You can't do it anymore. I mean, you can't take the kind of pictures that we took back then now, even if there were a residential theater where you could do it. And I mean, it's the same thing with Bob Bruin and some of the other photographers who were in the punk scene. It was still possible to do that, and it's totally transformed.
Yeah, it was a great story. Jim Marshall, who was a photographer in San Francisco, was once on a Rolling Stones tour. I guess it was in 1972. And about, like 4 weeks into the tour, Keith Richards turned to her and just said, "Jim, what are you doing here?" There was no assignment. There was no it was exactly that world of they kind of knew him and he just was along. And it was just finally occurred a month into a 6-week tour. It's just are you working? Or are you our friend? Or what's happening? And that sense of, is really hard. I mean, I have myself, so many great memories of shows I saw at the Fillmore, that it's shocking to think it was such a short period of time. I mean, it was so intense and compressed, and it just seemed like there were so many possibilities. And like everyone else, I mean, I didn't work there, so there were just things like, oh my God, I missed. I never did see Delaney and Bonnie with Eric Clapton, which I really regret, and a million other shows that were there that I just wasn't interested, or I didn't have money. I was a kid, and that element of all that happened in that place, in that compressed period of time is just extraordinary. But then, after that, kind of it really did become a business. And, it was then the 70s, and you had, bands like the Eagles and Fleetwood Mac, were just filling stadiums, and, that whole thing, really began to take over. Well, yes, over there.
My name is Mark Kruger. Is that you, Lee Irvin?
Yes, hey.
Hey, brother. Bob? Great to see you guys. I just wanted to say a few things.
Okay.
Bill Graham was one of the gentlest and most giving human beings that I've ever worked with. And I've thought a lot about this night. I've thought about 2 other mentors. I don't call Bill a mentor. I simply worked for him. but all three of those gentlemen had in common this kind of beautiful gentility and grace, particularly expressed to those who worked at their side. And that's what I remember about Bill in particular. I came out of the NYU school right next door. I heard Bob C's name mentioned a couple of times. I want to say I love the man, and I really miss him. There's some others who were here at the 40th. I couldn't make it because I was not well then. I'm so happy to say that we are the revolution. We are not just the survivors of, but we're at the forefront of everything that's exploding out there that's worth having now. And for our children and for our children's children. Now, I cut my chops under John Chester and Bob Goddard. I was the little guy, the third one in the sound crew. I was known for soldering capacitors to my fingers and pulling a lot of microphone cable back and forth. But to Joshua, personal note, you did something with the proverbial fourth wall of the proscenium that was transformative. And mostly I smoked pot. And your stuff was really great. But on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays when I was doing acid, it was really, really good. I'd like to know if you had anything to do with that personally.
Is there a question? Was there a question?
There's a question right there at the end, if you want to answer.
Because I couldn't find you in all the colors. I just wanted to let you know how much I appreciated staring
Yes.
with like befuddlement and hearing all this music at 120 dB and what? And not being able to blink for whole nights. Just watching you guys do your stuff.
Yes, Mark.
Joshua, could you take the mic? Joshua, could you take the mic?
I take the responsibility.
Excuse me, Joshua, could you take the mic?
Yes, Mark, it was me.
Lastly, my thanks to Amalie, who I spoke with about 10 days ago in a rough cellular conversation. And you're right. You look wonderful, girl.
Let's see, a question right there. You?
Well, just, why did it end? I mean, why did he shut it down?
I think it was business, you know.
Economics.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll start with Amalie and we'll go this way.
Well, it's been mentioned here before that Bill's idol in the showmanship was Saul Hurok, who programmed the great classical promoter, as it were.
Impresario.
And impresario, that's the word I was looking for. And Bill managed to work out a deal with Saul Hurok to book rock and roll for an entire week at the Metropolitan Opera House, which was a dream of his. And he got together a really good budget, and he went to the band and offered them $50,000 to do a week at the Metropolitan Opera House, and they laughed him out of the room and turned him down and said, that's ridiculous, it's chicken feed, and blah, 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 blah. And he was very embittered, and it kind of was snapped him, and he said, well, they didn't understand why this was so significant and important, and I'm getting out of the business. It was a very emotional, irrational decision, and I know that all of the other promoters, like Frank Barcelona, tried to talk him out of it, but he said, no, I'm done, and I'm getting out, and I'm going to close both Fillmores down, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But He could have kept, the economics had changed. He could have kept the Fillmore going, certainly for another couple of years. But it would have meant second-tier bands or raising the ticket prices in order to continue to get the really good bands who really didn't want to do, as Josh mentioned, four shows over 2 nights, or even a single show for 1 night at whatever they were able to offer, because there were only 2,632 seats in the theater. So that's why, those were all part of the reasons why he closed it down. But it could have kept going, and it was a shock. Nobody knew. I mean, when he called that press conference and all the staff came in, our jaws dropped. I mean, nobody had a clue or an idea that it was, and this was in April, and the last concert was June 27th. It was like that, and it was a real disappointment for everyone.
I was close to Bill and to the staff after I left. I still visited, came all the time and talked to them. They got very tired. The Beatles broke up. You know, they got tired. They got tired of the scene. They got tired of dealing with these acts, dealing with the managers, and the drugs changed. The whole nature of the zeitgeist changed within the very early 70s. And Bill was able to cut his nose off to spite his face. He was able to say, oh yeah, well, you can't fire me, I quit. And he did. Now, he turned right around and started promoting these big concerts, but the point was he had the power to say, forget it. And how many of us have that kind of power now? Who has that? So I always admired the fact that he did it. I thought it was dumb. He just should have let someone else run it. It would have been great. But he had the power to say goodbye, and he did.
I think they published his statement on the cover of the East Village Other, didn't they? It's a long explanation of why he quit, so you probably looked that up online. But I think they described it pretty well.
I have nothing to add. I think it was economics. I think, as Bill would say, Bill had stationery. I just thought of something. Right? We all know Bill is about the art and perfection and bringing things, but on Bill's stationery letterhead, it said in what you guys might call 25% ghost was the term they used, meaning in the background, and it said the following: it's not the money, 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 all the way down the page, and then at the end he goes, bullshit, it is the money. And I think that's what closed the Fillmore down.
I'm just going to guess.
Let's see if we can have maybe one more.
I think that
go ahead.
people, yeah, I just want to add something. I think that people operate from an inner feeling, an inner vibration, an inner desire. So if somebody gets angry at someone else, they're not really angry at someone else, they're angry because something hurts inside. I think Bill had just done it. He had explored and done the whole Fillmore thing and was personally, as a very creative human being, finished with it and really wanted to go on to other things. And all the reasons and everything else was very peripheral, I think, to what, that's just guessing, because he never told me. So,
well, what he went on to do was exactly the world that had ended at Fillmore East. I mean, you know, he became, you know, a promoter of these huge tours. I mean, there's just an astonishing, I mean, there's a very good kind of oral history of Bill Graham that's, I can't remember the writer, which is...
Oh, Greenfield.
Yeah, which is excellent. And in it, there's this astonishing story of when Bill wanted to, had been promoting the Rolling Stones, and they were his favorite band, and you know, all of this, and but the Stones were coming back in 1989, and we're going to do, you know, another world tour. They hadn't toured in 8 years, and they got this Canadian promoter named Michael Cole, who made a huge offer, a huge guarantee. And Graham was just going crazy, trying to, you know, essentially appeal to loyalty and see if he could get the money to do it. And so he calls up Mick Jagger, and Jagger says, well, okay, well, you know, I mean, I'm in London, and I'm flying to New York. And so, like, Bill flew from San Francisco to London to then get on a plane and fly with Mick Jagger back to the United States so that on the plane he could make his pitch for the tour. and which he did the entire way. And it was something like, you know, Michael Cole's offer was $80 million, and Bill said, look, you know, here it is. I've got this thing, and I've got the offer, and we've worked together all this time, and you know, I've got this now to $78 million. Like, you know, we can do this. You know, come on. You know, like, what's the difference? And Jagger just said, $2 million. You know, that was the world, you know, he was entering.